As an avid fan of turn-based JRPGs, it will come as no surprise to anyone that I love the Persona series, and was eagerly awaiting Persona 5 when it released on PS4 in April 2017. Its mix of stylish and smooth gameplay combined with its fun cast of characters and incredible story had me hooked, and when its improved re-release came out in 2020 in Persona 5 Royal, I jumped straight back in to be completely blown away by how much better it was than the original. The next year, I was similarly surprised by how much I enjoyed its hack and slash style sequel, Persona 5 Strikers, thinking that it was going to be a very shallow experience compared to the original games, but being proven wrong. When I first saw the trailer for Persona 5 Tactica, then I had high hopes. I like strategy RPGs, although I don't play them too often, and I already loved the characters and the setting, so I had quite high hopes when I loaded it up. It took me 43 hours over 2 playthroughs to earn Persona 5 Tactica's Platinum Trophy, so let's see if it lived up to my expectations. There is something immediately different from Persona 5 and Strikers to Persona 5 Tactica, and that's this: its shift in art direction. Persona 5 and Persona 5 Strikers have a more classic anime style, where Persona 5 Tactica decides to go in a more chibi anime style that is more similar to other Persona side titles like Persona Q. Whether you enjoy this or not is probably a matter of taste, and the longer I played the game I did get more used to it, but it isn't an art style that I particularly enjoy in really any of my media. Most of this distaste was in the visual novel-esque cutscenes or movie scenes, however. I felt the proportions just made the characters look a bit ridiculous. In gameplay segments though, I did feel like it actually worked in the game's favour. The smaller character models stood out and moved really well against the backdrops of cover-filled arenas that you end up having to fight through. I particularly liked how good the personas themselves looked when you use your skills and unique abilities as well. The enemy designs were good, even if the number of unique enemies was pretty small. The fact that they changed appearances between the areas in the story was really nice, and really helped tie them into the theme of the area you're in. Every boss looked really cool and different, although there were only 4 of them in the game, and I do wish there had been more of these throughout. Even some mini-bosses would have really been appreciated. I do appreciate the consistency in the design between gameplay and story, but I think I would have really liked a style that matched the original games more, and I was quite disappointed that it wasn't. Performance-wise, I had no issues throughout the game. It ran really smoothly and had no issues keeping up with me flicking quickly between different targets on the map. Getting in and out of most menus was really quick, although there were some small delays getting in and out of the Velvet Room to fuse personas, which was slightly frustrating on my second playthrough when I was having to go there quite a lot to fill out the compendium. One issue I did have, particularly in the beginning parts of the game, was an issue with the dialogue. It was much quieter than the admittedly amazing background music, but it was still quite distracting. My feelings about the artistic direction of the game do somewhat mirror my feelings about the game's story and characters themselves. It might have just been something I was more sensitive to, especially as someone who's such a fan of the original game and its sequel, but to me it felt like the main cast, their personalities and dialogue, was simplified and caricatured just as much as their character art was. Most of the characters seemed like flanderized versions of themselves, and most of their dialogue, when not directly moving the plot along or interacting with the 2 new characters, were just retreading things that had come before. Morgana gets called a cat a lot and complains about it. Makoto and Haru are going to beat you up and you might like it. Ryuji doesn't think things through, and Yusuke only cares about art or food. There's more to these characters than these single character points, and it's a shame that Tactica relies on these so much. Persona 5 Tactica is by no means a long game, and with its place in the timeline being somewhere between the last boss of the original Persona 5 but before the protagonist returns home in the end cutscene, there wasn't really a lot of room for character development for the main cast. It's just a shame to see characters that I really enjoyed for their depth and growth throughout the original game sort of get memed to death. Thankfully though, the core of this narrative isn't about the original cast, it's about the 2 new characters, Toshiro and Erina. Both of these characters are met early on in the story after the Phantom Thieves are pulled into a strange new version of the metaverse, and while Erina almost immediately endears herself to me, I did not like Toshiro at all. However, as the story progresses and you travel through the 4 main kingdoms that make up the 4 chapters of the story, I found myself growing to like Toshiro quite a lot. The way that the story progresses and reveals itself through each kingdom is a bit cliche with Toshiro's inconvenient amnesia, but the reveals are worth it, and I found myself genuinely surprised by some of the twists that come at the later game. Despite my issues with the way that the returning cast is handled, Persona 5 Tactica does have a lot of good cutscenes and good dialogue in it. There are no social links or hangout opportunities like there were in the previous two games, but there are small optional visual style novel talks that you can have between combat encounters, and some of these are quite good. I particularly liked one where the group are talking about marriage, and you can pick one of your companions to imagine a wedding with for an amusing scene. There are also small chats that happen before optional quests that you can do, and while most of these have nothing major to add to the story, they are good for getting more backstory and character moments, particularly from Erina and Toshiro, so they're definitely worth watching. One thing I really loved was the main menu screen between missions. This, depending on where you are in the story, will show different scenes of the gang hanging out in the Blunk, eating curry, or just chatting. One of my favourites has a small animation of Morgana, Haru and Toshiro playing cards, which loops them taking the Joker card out of each other's hands like they're playing Old Maid, and I thought it was a really cute thing just to sit and watch between missions. The missions themselves make for a fun, albeit simple, strategy RPG. You choose 3 characters from the Phantom Thieves plus Arena, and you get put on a map filled with cover and enemies to fight. Each character gets to move a certain number of squares and gets to do one action, which can be a ranged gun attack, an up-close melee attack that knocks the enemy back while you move into their square, or a persona skill attack. The first thing I want to talk about is movement, which I think is something the game does really well compared to other RPGs and makes for some interesting gameplay moments. As I said, each character gets to move a certain number of squares on their turn. However, these are only actually used once you commit to an action or end your turn. This means that, if your movement is 5 squares, you can move 5 squares in any direction, change your mind, and go to a different square that is on the opposite side of where you moved initially. This might not sound like much, but you can use this to your advantage, as interacting with things like floor switches to make platforms move don't interrupt your movement, and it's in figuring out this and how to abuse it that my favourite part of the game begins to take shape. There is another mechanic in Tactica, where if you attack an enemy that is out of cover, or suffering from certain status effects, you will do a critical attack. And the same way that a critical hit does in Persona 5, it gives you a 1 more bonus. This lets you take another action immediately with the character who got the critical hit, and this includes their movement. It also puts the enemy in a down state, and 2 lines will connect your 3 characters together to form a triangle. If you position yourself so that the downed enemy is within the triangle, you can do a special attack called a triple threat attack. This will hit every enemy caught in the triangle for a huge attack, but it only uses the instigating character's action. So, when you combine these 2 mechanics, you can get one character into position to instigate the triple threat, then move the other 2 around the map to make this triangle catch as many enemies as you can at once, even if it leaves the other 2 out of cover, as you can just move them back after if you haven't used an action with them. It's immensely satisfying to do, and some of the missions require you to think about your movements and actions a lot when trying to get through some of the more puzzle-based levels. There are some optional quests that ask you how to figure out how to defeat all the enemies on the map in one turn, and abusing the movement and 1 more mechanics is key to this. The rest of the combat is pretty simple, and this felt intentional to really highlight the movement and puzzle aspects that I just mentioned. Each map is full of items that act as full cover, which will protect you from attacks while you're behind it, or half cover, which gives you resistance to any incoming damage. This cover applies to enemies as well, and the core of the gameplay is to stay in cover while knocking your enemies from behind it. Melee attacks are great at this, and as they usually leave you standing in the cover the enemy was just using as a bonus, but it's your persona skills that really do the heavy lifting here. Each of the Phantom Thieves has their main persona and an element attached to them. These elements are changed slightly from the main series and are now tied to specific effects. What was now Wind is now Sweep, which will gust enemies up and move them a couple of squares away from where they were, and hopefully out of cover. Psychic is now Hypnotize, and this does a similar thing except it brings the enemies closer to you. Ice and Fire do what you would expect them to do, either freezing the enemies in place for an easy crit, or burning them for extra damage over time. Each character, except Arena, can also equip one sub-persona which you can fuse and unlock to broaden the types of damage they do or buff them with auto skills such as increasing the amount of squares they can move. The game rewards you for mixing up your character choices too, as characters who weren't used in the last battle will get a boost to their damage or HP in the next one, so it's good to rotate them out. Each character also has access to unique attacks, which are tied to a voltage meter that will charge over time. This can have lots of different effects depending on the character using them. Joker gets to hit enemies as if their cover didn't exist, whereas Arn will create a small bomb that will take each turn to walk towards an enemy and then blow them up. And it's fun to see the animations of these attacks and also the effects that they have on the enemies. However, by the time I got to my second playthrough, there were definite characters that I started using in every mission just because I found they made things quicker by having guns with like AoE effects or better movement skills. The enemies you face will try and take advantage of these mechanics as well though. The regular rank and file enemies just have guns, but they will move around to get into positions where you're not in cover. And as you progress through the story, more types of enemies start to appear, such as the brute enemies who will knock you out of cover with melee attacks so their companions can shoot you for critical hits, which will give them their own one more. There are enemies that buff each other or heal, or enemies that will face you to block your attacks completely, forcing you to pincer them to take them down. All of these foes will try and kill you while forcing you to deal with gate puzzles or lifts that create alternating platforms. Each mission also has 3 optional objectives that you will need to do all of them for a trophy, which sometimes require you to take out all the enemies in a certain number of turns or be damaged less than a certain amount. So there's a lot to think about. Overall, this isn't the most complex strategy RPG there is by any stretch, but there was enough there to keep me having fun with the missions, and although I played it on the PS5, I do feel like it would be really good on the Switch. Each mission is short and sweet, so you could play it in small chunks on the train or on your break at work. As I mentioned before, the bosses had some really great designs, and their fights were a great mix of puzzle and challenge, and I really enjoyed this. Lastly then, let's have a look at what the journey to getting the Platinum trophy, called Legendary Phantom Thief, was like. Overall, I would say it was pretty easy. There weren't any missable trophies at all, and although it took me almost 2 full playthroughs, it only took me around 43 hours in total, and I definitely could have been quicker. You can choose to play the game on any difficulty if you wish, but the normal difficulty wasn't really challenging at all, and I think the only missions I failed were the ones with turn limits that I didn't notice. There is a trophy for having a character die and be replaced on the field 10 times, and I didn't get this until the end of the game, which is how easy it is on the normal difficulty. There are 7 trophies that come through natural story progression, but there are a handful that I imagine are almost impossible to miss as well, such as travelling 10,000 squares, taking 500 turns, doing 200 one more attacks, 100 shooting attacks, 100 melee and 100 skills, that you definitely should have all of these early on in your second playthrough. The other combat related trophies are really easy to get as well. Use 50 unique skills, which are the ones that cost voltage to use, 50 triple threat attacks, which you should be doing anyway, and use each of the status elements 20 times. Just as a note, these status ones have to be inflicted by the character's main persona, for example, so Joker has to inflict despair with Arsene, Ryuji has to inflict shock with Captain Kidd, etc. The only 2 of these I had any issues with were the sleep one, which require you to create a sleep fusion weapon to use. This mechanic unlocks about halfway through the game, and I mostly ignored it on my first playthrough, so it took most of my second playthrough to get a sleep-infused grenade launcher for Haru. I also weirdly struggled with Makoto's Vortex, because I didn't realise the mechanic that it dragged the enemies towards each other until the last kingdom, and had been using it on single enemies and wondering why they didn't move. So yeah, just be more attentive than I am, and you should be fine. If it helps, there is a small circle and line that will highlight if and where an enemy will be moved to, which helped me get the trophy in the end. The last combat trophy is to do 2000 damage in a single attack. I did this by using one of the last optional quests that you get, and trying to get as many enemies as possible inside a single triple threat attack, as the damage doesn't need to be contained to one enemy. For weapons, you will need to create 10 fusion weapons, which can cost a lot of money if you're needing to summon personas of the right element. You will also need to buy 10 and 50 unique weapons for 2 other trophies. These ones don't have to be fusion weapons, they're just the ones that you can buy in the shop, but it does cost quite a lot, which is a running theme for most of these trophies. You can dismantle weapons to get some money back, and doing this 10 times will get you another trophy called Novice Dismantler. Then there are the completionist trophies, and the reason that you need to do almost 2 full playthroughs are for these trophies. As in all Persona games, you need to finish the compendium, which means fusing or earning every single Persona that you can for the Collection of Knowledge trophy. This trophy actually encompasses quite a few others on the list that you'll get while going for this one. One of these is earning 666,666 yen for the Metaverse Aristocrat trophy, and you'll need to spend more than this buying all the weapons and fusing all the Personas anyway, so I'm pretty sure this is almost unmissable. There are also some hidden unlockable fusions that you can unlock by completing the optional quests in each kingdom, which gets you another trophy called Conqueror of Kingdoms. These quests also unlock the final skills that you need for the New Heights trophy. While going for compendium completion, you will almost certainly see a fusion accident where you get a persona different from the one that the game says you will get, and this will give you the trophy Accidents Happen. And also the highest level fusion of Satanael, which you need to be level 96 to unlock, will get you the Ultimate Mask trophy. Some of the fusions are actually locked behind New Game Plus, and you will need to get to at least level 91 to be able to fuse this last persona on New Game Plus. Lastly, you need to reach level 99, watch all of the hideout talk conversations, and achieve all of the awards for each mission. This can take some time, but you can go back and replay any missions that you've missed if you need to. For me, the longest part of getting all the trophies was farming the money I needed to fill out the compendium and reach level 99, since level doesn't carry over to New Game Plus, you have to start from scratch. Since you need to get to level 91 in New Game Plus anyway, I left both of these for my second run. You can make this a lot easier on yourself by doing a bit of prep before you finish the last mission on your first game though. If you fuse the Dionysus persona, it has an XP bonus skill called Knack for Conflict, and then if you fuse him into 2 other monsters, they can inherit that skill. On New Game Plus, there's no level limit to what you can summon from the compendium, only to what you can fuse. So when you get access to the compendium again, summon Dionysus and the 2 monsters you fused him into, and equip them straight away, and you'll get a huge XP bonus as you go through the game a second time. I hit level 99 by the time I started the last act. There is a similar thing you can do for money with the persona Ganesha, who has the skill Easy Money. Fuse this twice to inherit the skill as well, and equip it on 3 of your characters, and you can farm money instead of the XP. I replayed mission 43 and stuck it on the easiest difficulty. Using Ryuji, Morgana, and Yusuke, I could kill all of the enemies in 2 turns and earn about 35,000 yen in like 3 minutes. I did this 5 or 6 times at the end of the game when I needed some more money, just to get some of the more expensive special fusions done. Overall, I would say that I did enjoy my time with Persona 5 Tactica. It was a fun little game that didn't overstay its welcome, but didn't really scratch the same itch that Persona games usually do for me, due to its not great characterizations of its core cast. I would definitely recommend it if you do enjoy simple strategy games, but if you're looking for something more complex, you won't find it in Persona 5 Tactica. I am glad that I got to go on one more adventure with the Phantom Thieves, but now more than ever, I'd like to move on from them, I think, and just get excited for the inevitable Persona 6. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you thought of Persona 5 Tactica in the comments. If you want a more spoiler-filled review, then please head to pressxgaming.com, where I've written versions of all my Platinum reviews, and some spoiler versions that go into a bit more depth on my opinions of stories on bosses.